What is the best ground type Pokemon by WolfeyVGC? I am expecting Landorus to make an appearance.
What's the best ground type Pokemon? I want to know. You want to know. Good news. We're going to find out together.
Nice.
I think ground type Pokemon are cool because although it's not the single best type or probably even a top 3 type, ground type Pokemon are consistently good. So I feel like there's some real classics on this list here. Normally I start these videos telling you how hard the list was to make, but this one was actually pretty easy. There were only about 10 ground types that I was even considering for this list, and they range from pretty good in a niche context to some of the best Pokemon of all time. So it was actually pretty easy to put together. We'll start at the bottom of the list and work our way up to number 1. So the Pokemon will get better as the list progresses. Also, I know what you're thinking, and it's probably that my hair is really stupid, but I was up late working on the Worlds video, and then I showered late, and then I went to bed because I was really tired, and now it looks like this, okay? And were there solutions to the
His hair's fine. I actually woke up today with like Sasuke Uchiha duck butt hair. Like half of my, like the left half of my hair from wearing my headphones was completely just like stuck out, and the right half was just like down. I literally had Sasuke Uchiha hair. It was super funny.
problem? Yes. But did I find them? No. So I don't want to read any comments about it. Anyway, let's talk about the number 10.
I do appreciate how he does deal with negativity. I've been very combative, and I will 100% take that L and self-acknowledgement. That has been my own journey of understanding how people work, especially like if people are either from an uninformed perspective or just entrenched in their opinion, wanting to be combative. It's odd because on one hand, absolutely, my default response is to be combative. I have military that watches me, right? One thing that I can respect about the military is not only can they get a job done, but they talk to you, right? I will tell you if I do not like you. I will tell you if you're a poopy stupid doo-doo head, right? For all intents and purposes, right? But like on the other hand, it's also about being more professional and having limits and understanding that like, yeah, you're going to have those odd comments. And it's best to, unfortunately, just ignore them. Or in the case where they actually do start to escalate, or they do start to, I had a comment, and I do make this known. I had a comment talking about how someone's going to quote unquote take aim at the tall anime boy. You just, you follow the proper protocol there, and you deal with the comment as necessary. Which is actually subsequently why I continue to explain. I will not have a range day video. I will not do a meet and greet. I do not feel secure in that. But I digress. We're going to get back to Pokemon here. I just want to point out just philosophical understandings, differences, and appreciating how Wolfey can still do it, as I was averse to it at first, but I feel like he approaches it in a professional manner that I greatly respect and honestly can draw a lot of inspiration from.
Best ground type Pokemon, Nidoking. Nidoking?
Nidoking. Nidoking.
Okay.
Nidoking. I don't know. For viewers familiar with competitive Pokemon, you might be a little surprised to see Nidoking on this list. It's not a Pokemon that often pops off. In fact, it's a Pokemon that really doesn't see that much play in most formats. However, it does have some things going for it, and under the right conditions, it was very strong. Nidoking isn't a very powerful Pokemon, but it compensates for this by also not being very bulky. The thing is, although it's not exceptional in either dimension, it's also not very fast. But all this is okay because all of its stats are also okay. Like,
it's kind of this like aggressively mediocre Swiss Army knife that gets access to like sheer force in later generations, which sheer force does also negate the damage caused by Life Orb. Like Nidoking is kind of this weird option of like you're kind of just aggressively mid, but you're also not awful. And it kind of has some interesting use cases, especially because it has lightning immunity, right? I guess electric immunity, right? Technically, if we're going actual wording, it has electric immunity because of that ground typing. It hits stab poison, so I think it gets access to gunk shot. At the very minimum, you're running poison jab, stab poison jab, getting off of a sheer force Life Orb Nidoking, which is probably adamant. Throw a Whimsicott or kill a Wattrel with Tailwind, because kill a Wattrel can use Discharge at that point with 0 impact on Nidoking. Like, you're trucking at, what is it? Tailwind doubles. So if you're running speed neutral nature, which you're most likely with Adamant to get the most bang out of your buck for attack, 85 times 2, 170 base speed without speed investment already, because you can go into bulk HP, etc. Or you can do speed to get that extra edge. And you're just trucking into fairy types. I think that it's a lot of things are just okay in the right ways that Nidoking is actually a viable option. It's super fascinating to watch this Pokemon work.
None of them are terrible. It's all like middle of the pack. The reason why Nidoking is on this list is because it has some things that it does really well that are somewhat unique to it.
Right.
See, ground types as a whole are really heavily geared towards being physical attackers. It's similar to fighting type Pokemon, where most of the Pokemon of that type tend to be better as physical attackers than special. Nidoking is one of the exceptions. Although it doesn't have a super high special attack stat, it's able to use its ability to make itself stronger. Sheer Force is an ability that powers up all moves that have a secondary effect, but takes away that secondary effect. This is valuable.
Which is why when somebody was telling me about the life orb interaction, I guess it's because the HP loss is counted as a secondary effect. The life orb interaction, I feel, is a bug, but it's clearly not a bug because it's been present for a few generations now. It's wild. Like, Sheer Force is actually super legit.
On Nidoking because almost all of the moves that it wants to use have a secondary effect, and for the most part, these secondary effects are only like happening 10 to 20% of the time, so you don't really mind giving them up. Sheer Force is a really good ability because it has a weird interaction with the item Life Orb, which also gives a power boost, but then causes the user to lose 10% of their health every time they hit something. What's weird about Life Orb and Sheer Force,
I thought it was 10% of damage. Interesting.
Is that when you have both Life Orb and Sheer Force in the same Pokemon and you use a move that has a secondary effect, you don't take the recoil damage. For some reason, the damage that you would take from Life Orb counts as a secondary effect of the move from Sheer Force. This might be a little confusing, but basically you get double the benefit for none of the cost.
What does the paper actually say, though?
From Sheer Force. This might be a little...
Basically, Life Orb's recoil is an additional effect. It classifies as keyword additional effect. If the move also has an additional effect, then no recoil, it cancels out. Power from both Life Orb and Sheer Force stacks, so you get a 69 % damage increase, double the benefit, none of the cost.
Confusing, but basically you get double the benefit for none of the cost. Nidoking is an especially good user of Sheer Force because it has a really weirdly deep move pool. It gets moves like Flamethrower, Ice Beam.
It's a Gen 1 Pokemon, that's why. Because think about Tauros, right? Tauros gets like Blizzard, right? You have Meowth. Meowth gets like Thunderbolt, right? Gen 1 here's my understanding of this. Gen 1 Pokemon have a weirdly deep move pool because of how limited moves were back in Gen 1. Not everything will get everything. Sure, Mew did, right? But like, that's just because of what Mew was. But because there were such limited moves in Gen 1, a lot of that kind of got grandfathered in. So now you have Nidoking with access to, like, I'm sure there's access to Blizzard. You have Flamethrower, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt as generations go on. You have access to, like, Earth Power. Like, dude, it's so nutty.
Thunderbolt, like, I don't know why a ground and poison type Pokemon is able to use these moves, but it's able to use a ton of weird moves that don't match either of its typing. Also, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but just to say it out loud, it's really hard to get ground type attackers that are also special attackers because almost all of the good ground type Pokemon are physical. So Nidoking being able to be a source of ground type damage that's a special attacker while also having valuable coverage moves is really valuable. Poison also became much more valuable after X and Y because of the addition of fairy typing. So having a poison type to resist fairy and also to hit fairy type Pokemon for super effective damage was really valuable. All of this combined to make Nidoking a special attacking Pokemon that was able to resist key threats and hit key threats for super effective damage while also providing special damage in a way that not a lot of other Pokemon could kind of substitute for. And this resulted in it getting second place at an international championship in 2018. Nidoking also got second place at a national championship back in 2012, so it saw a little bit of longevity across formats, so this was pretty much the extent of its success. Our number 9 Pokemon has had a lot.
I mean, yeah, Nidoking is, if you've never tried Nidoking, even if you're just going through the story, right? Like, let's say you're going through Pokemon Platinum or something like that, right? Let's say you're going through Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Let's say you're going through Sword and Shield, Scarlet Violet, right? Pick up Nidoking. Pick up Nidoking, get a Sheer Force Nidoking, throw a Life Orb on it. Like, just watch it in action. It kind of just, Todd Howard, it kind of just works.
More success than Nidoking has, and at one point was even one of the dominant forces that players were using. It's Rhyperior, the evolution of Rhydon. Now, Rhyperior was used a little bit back in Black and White and X and Y. It actually got second at Nationals back in 2013 in the last year of Black 2 and White 2, and then placed fourth at a National in 2014, the fall.
This is actually all new information to me. I thought that Rhydon with Eviolite was going to be more of a threat. This is actually super interesting to hear about Rhyperior's competitive history.
Following year, the first year of X and Y, but neither of these finishes are so remarkable that it would earn its place on this list on its own. The real reason Rhyperior is here is that it was one of the best Pokemon during Sword and Shield's initial few months. Rhyperior was
yes, it was. It had just the right amount of bulk. It was kind of a weird interaction, especially with the Dynamax mechanic. The Dynamax mechanic just, people have opinions on the Dynamax mechanic. I'm actually personally thankful that we may be moving back to megas. We're gonna see how well this video dates itself going forward. No, I remember this. What was I running? I mean, I was running season 1, 2, and 3. I was running early Sword and Shield.
Kind of perfectly positioned to just take advantage of all the unique conditions surrounding the earlier part of Sword and Shield, and it resulted in it being an extremely threatening Pokemon. Here's what you need to know. First, Sword and Shield introduced Dynamax, which allowed a Pokemon to double its HP pool and powered up all of its individual moves. Rhyperior was a good Dynamax attacker for a couple of reasons. First, it has the ability Solid Rock, which causes all super effective damage to do less damage than it would otherwise. This is a big deal when you double your HP pool, because even though Rhyperior has a couple quadruple weaknesses, it has really good natural physical defense and a decent HP stat, and so when you're tuning down super effective moves and you're doubling how much health you have, it becomes really difficult to get rid of. Rhyperior was also able to take advantage of the fact that Dynamax powered up your moves. Of course, all Pokemon benefited from their moves getting stronger, but Rhyperior was able to take advantage of it for other reasons. As a rock,
I think Max Rock, didn't Max Rock actually set Sand too? And because Sand increases the special defense of rock types by 50%. Like, don't get me wrong, quad weaknesses suck, right? Especially if you're weak to a very good typing or a very popular typing. If you are weak to Earthquake, you have to justify your existence. If you are weak to something like Scald, you have to justify your existence, especially because Rhyperior could get burned. It's a physical attacker. Burn halves. Burn reduces attack by 75%, if I remember correctly. Burn is relevant. So you have to kind of justify it. Being able to have Solid Rock on top of max moves that actually can set certain conditions, like Max Water, I believe actually set Rain as well, right? Max Fire, pretty sure that actually set Sun. There was some modularity here.
Type Pokemon, it wasn't able to use any moves that are 100% accurate. This is a fun fact many of you might not know, but pretty much all of the rock moves worth using can miss. There are a couple exceptions, but moves like Rock Slide, Meteor Beam, and Stone Edge are some of the most prevalent ones, and they all are inaccurate. So first of all, Rhyperior could not only get a damage boost, but it could also not miss. The other advantage, though, was that each Dynamax move gained a secondary effect, and both of Rhyperior's secondary effects were really valuable. The Rock Type 1 set up the Sandstorm, which not only overwrote your opponent's weather conditions and did a little bit of damage to your opponents every turn, but it also makes Rhyperior tankier on the special side, which is its far lower defensive stats. Max Quake also just gives both Rhyperior and its partner a special defense boost, again making them much harder to get rid of. Rhyperior is also very slow, which made it a very good Pokemon to use in Trick Room, where
Trick Room would make sense here. I mean, you could, run something, because Tailwind became dynamic as far as I remember in Gen 8, right? Meaning that if you had a Prankster, Tailwind, Whimsicott, right, and you use Prankster to Tailwind, or even like a Tornadus Therian, right, like you Prankster to knock it first, that turn your Pokemon will have their speed doubled. It's not like it was up and through Sun and Moon, right, where you had to use it and then the following turns suddenly it took effect, right? Which I actually really appreciate the dynamic Tailwind change. I think it was a good change. I think that it adds a lot to team building. It makes Tailwind definitely threatening if you have something in the next slot over. I think personally here, the Trick Room would make a lot more sense, because even if you doubled it to base 80, like you're still just not hitting certain thresholds. I think Trick Room does make sense here, which then leads into the unfortunate interaction we have where we just don't have a way to guarantee 0 IVs, because if you're running Trick Room, you want to have that 0 IV speed, because if you have your Rhyperior and your opponent has a Rhyperior and your Rhyperior has 1 speed IV, well, you're just going to lose every single time. Like, not the match, but you're going to lose that speed tie every single time because you are 1 point faster. So it's why I keep advocating we need something like a negative bottle cap to get certain IVs down, because there are situations where you do want your speed at 0 and you do want your attack at 0, because confusion does scale off of your attack stat.
Slow Pokemon move before fast ones. The last piece of the puzzle that I've kind of buried the lead on here, though, is the item that Rhyperior would hold. It's the weakness policy, and it doubles a Pokemon's attack and special attack stats after they've been hit by a super effective move. This not only has incredible synergy with Solid Rock, which again weakens opposing super effective moves, but many players would actually activate their own Rhyperior's weakness policy on their own. This not only has great synergy with Solid Rock if your opponent ever hit Rhyperior with a super effective attack, though many people would actually just activate their own weakness policy. Dusclops was the most popular partner, and it could use moves like Bulldoze or Brick Break to attack its own partner Rhyperior, doing basically 0 damage because Dusclops is so weak, but doubling Rhyperior's offensive stats.
You're also potentially going to win a Trick Room tie if you Bulldoze your own Rhyperior as well, because Bulldoze hitting everything lowers everything by 1 speed stage, right? Grats. your speed stage has been lowered by 1. Your Rhyperior now underspeeds the other Rhyperior, especially if you're in Trick Room. I like that synergy. Dusclops with Eviolite was a threat in Sword and Shield.
Used this combination to get second place at a regional, actually, back at the beginning of Sword and Shield, and it was really dangerous. It had a ton of success. All these factors combined to make Rhyperior one of the best Pokemon when Sword and Shield first released, and the fact that it had a little success outside of just Sword and Shield as well definitely convinced me that it should be on this list.
Yeah,
I learned a fun fact recently that I thought was a little bit surprising. According to researchers at Dark Cat University, subscribing to the WolfeyVGC YouTube channel can actually make you 10 to 15% more attractive on average to strangers. Now, I was as surprised as you probably are to hear this, but I figured I would pass it along because, yeah, this is really groundbreaking stuff. Researchers also found that there are other benefits to subscribing as well, such as telling YouTube that you want to see more of this content and supporting the channel as well as everybody who works on it. Anyway, if you don't like hearing about it, I'm sorry, I'm just the messenger. You can take it up with the big cat. Coming in at number 8 is a Pokemon that
I like that though. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, if you're wanting something, right? If you're wanting like subscribers, just ask. Like, don't like beg, don't like it doesn't interrupt the flow of the video really. It is a just like, hi, this is a thing. I also like the humor behind it. Skibbity got to you, dear Rizzler. And now that I've given someone an aneurysm, let's get on to number 8.
Actually a world champion, Mamoswine. Mamoswine not only won the world championships back in 2013, it also won multiple regional championships during Black and White. That being said, the world's victory was over 10 years ago, and Mamoswine hasn't had a ton more success since then. That's being a little bit kind about it. It really hasn't seen any usage since then. So that's the reason why, despite being a world champion, it's not higher on the list. That being said, being a world champion is a really big deal. Mamoswine was able to win worlds despite not being very popular or really even used at all in 2013 because of a combination of its typing and its stats. There were a lot of flying type Pokemon during the last year of Black and White's competitive scene, one of which was Thundurus, who was just a nightmare to play against. Thundurus was used as this incredibly disruptive support Pokemon that really
I think Thunderwave back then might have had 100% accuracy. I'd have to double check that. Like, I know Toxic went down to 90, right? Unless you're a poison type, and then Toxic will hit. There's some interactions there. Like, things have gotten nerfed over time.
Focused on just paralyzing all of your Pokemon and making them unable to move. Mamoswine was kind of perfectly positioned to deal with Thundurus because not only was it a ground-type Pokemon, making it immune to all electric-type moves, but as an ice-type Pokemon, it was also able to threaten the flying types back. Thundurus, Landorus, and Tornadus were all very popular this year, and they were all hit by the ice-type moves, but Mamoswine's coverage was also able to hit many
technically Landorus is 4x.
Other meta Pokemon as well, like Heatran and Tyranitar with its ground type moves and Amoonguss with its ice type moves. Mamoswine was also fast enough that with a Choice Scarf, it would outrun most of the popular Pokemon in the format, allowing it to attack them for big damage before they could move. Again, it wasn't.
I'm sorry, you're beating Hydreigon in Black and White format? Yes, you do have some sort of utility then.
Very popular at the time. I think the world's Mamoswine was the only one I saw all year, but it was so well positioned that it was able to win the world championships. Now, even though Mamoswine hasn't been good for a while, I do think it's worth noting that it could be good again at some point if the conditions were right again, because it received a pretty major buff, I think in Sword and Shield, though it might have been in Scarlet and Violet. Mamoswine's primary ability that it used to use was Thick Fat to reduce damage from fire and ice type moves, but recently its Oblivious ability was buffed. Oblivious was not a very useful ability before, but now it prevents a Pokemon's attack from being lowered via Intimidate.
Yeah, Intimidate's really been on the chopping block the last few generations because Intimidate, like, it's kind of like Shadow Tag, how Shadow Tag keeps getting hit, right? Because Gen 3, I think it's False Swipe Gaming video. I think it's on the Wobbuffet video specifically. There's a specific interaction in Gen 3 where you can just have 2 Wobbuffets that cannot do enough damage. They will struggle, but so both of them are holding leftovers. They can't switch out because both of them are Shadow Tag. And if the Wobbuffet were to struggle at each other, the damage that they cause will be completely nullified because the leftovers will heal more than the damage is dealt, and thus you enter an eternal game state. Shadow Tag has obviously seen a couple nerfs over the years. Shadow Tag users can now swap out against each other. I think Dark types are no longer affected by Shadow Tag. I think it's Dark. I don't think it's Ghost. Maybe it's Ghost. I'd have to check. I have to check the actual buff log. It's been a while since I've looked at it, especially because I was looking at Dragapult for a little recently. Yeah, no, Intimidate's also been on the chopping block too as well. Intimidate has gotten not necessarily nerfed so much as other things like Oblivious are able to deal with Intimidate now because Intimidate is just such a omnipresent factor.
Intimidate is very popular. It's the main way that you reduce the damage from physical attackers, so being immune to it as a physical attacker is a pretty big deal. Now, this buff didn't take Mamoswine to being, you know, meta relevant at all, but I think that it could again in the future be good in part because of this buff. Our number 7 slot.
I feel like that would make Wasi a very happy Wasi. PTCG Radio loves Mamoswine. I feel like Mamoswine coming back into play would make him a very happy Wasi.
Is another Pokemon that's won the World Championships. Crocodile. I really like Crocodile. I think it's a funny Pokemon and its name is fun to say. Now, Crocodile is above Mamoswine because not only did it win the World Championships in 2017, it actually got second at the World Championships in 2011 as well. On top of that, Crocodile was a great Pokemon throughout 2017 and a bit of 2018 as well, actually winning multiple regional championships. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Crocodile is like the strongest Pokemon of all time. It's really just a Pokemon that can shine when the power level is lower because there aren't stronger alternatives around. But some competitive rule sets do ban a lot of the Pokemon out, and so in those formats, Crocodile has been able to shine. Crocodile is a ground and dark type Pokemon who is primarily used with the Intimidate ability, which, as I mentioned before, is just one of the most valuable and versatile abilities in the game. Crocodile has decent stats. It's not unbelievably bulky, but it's bulky enough, especially with Intimidate, that it probably isn't going to go down to 1 hit. And it's not so fast, but it's fast enough that it can kind of play in this middle speed tier, and it's decently powerful. I wouldn't say that Dark is an incredibly synergistic type with Ground, but it is just nice to have a secondary type so you get a couple more resistances and you get more offensive moves. One of the reasons why Crocodile was used a little bit in 2017 or 2018 was actually because it was a really good Pokemon to pair with Eevee. Eevee was given a signature Z move.
Extreme Eva boost into the Crocodile. Are we getting? This was full power knockoff too, right?
Which we can't show you because it will flag copyright because it was shown in a trailer. But basically, this Z move double.
Yeah, Yeah, that's so strange because wouldn't. So who's the copyright coming from though? Would it be coming from Pokemon specifically? That's such a strange thing, especially if it's especially if you are either in Pokemon's good graces or even potentially partnered with Pokemon. Would they not allow? I'm very curious, like from the copyright and legal side of things, where their stance currently is with that. I think it's interesting, and I think we talked about this in another video as well. I think it's interesting. I don't know what to do with that information. There's a copyright commentary there. I don't know what the takeaway is.
All of Eevee's stats. Now, Eevee couldn't really use these stats very well, so what it would do is baton pass to give the stats to another Pokemon. Crocodile was a prime choice here because not only was it immune to Prankster moves because of its dark typing, but it also was able to use the move Power Trip, which is a move that starts out very weak but becomes stronger the more stat boost you have. With Eevee passing Crocodile, I think 10 stat boosts, Power Trip would KO pretty much any Pokemon in the game. Crocodile is another Pokemon where I think it can only come back when the power level is significantly lower, but it does have enough going for it that I think it wouldn't be shocking to see it perform well again in the future. That's a little
I think that's super cute. I would love to see Crocodile come back. That is super awesome.
A little different than our number 6 Pokemon, which is a Pokemon that is actively still getting results today. It's Excadrill, a ground and steel type Pokemon. Now, Excadrill's never won the World Championships, but it did place top 4 in 2012 and top 8 in 2013. It also had multiple national top 4s during the Black and White era. It got a first and a second at Nationals in 2015. It won Nationals in 2018. It was really good in 2020. And most recently, it won a regional just a couple months ago. So what makes Excadrill so good? First, Steel is just a great type to have. It's good offensively against fairy types, which can be a real problem, but it's mostly good defensively, giving the Pokemon a ton of resistances. The real reason that Excadrill is so good though has to do with its stats and its ability. Excadrill has a high
a Sandstream with an 88 speed is nothing to scoff at. If somehow you're still losing out, sure, hypothetically, you could either whack a choice scarf on there, or you could just even Tailwind. Like, you can make this thing absolutely screaming fast.
Attack stat, allowing it to do big damage, and it's reasonably fast, but it really becomes scary when the sand is up thanks to its ability Sand Rush. Excadrill is pretty much the only Sand Rush Pokemon that has ever been relevant. Sand Rush doubles a Pokemon's speed in the Sandstorm, and doubling your speed stat is a pretty big deal. There is an ability like this for every weather condition, but whereas there's multiple good Pokemon to choose from when it comes to sun or rain, Sand, you pretty much just have Excadrill, which is okay because Excadrill is really good because it has.
I think a couple of the fossil Pokemon from Sword and Shield got it. Like, there are other Sand Rush users, but Excadrill kind of just stands head and shoulders above.
A high attack stat, and ground and steel have pretty decent synergy together. It's a very threatening Pokemon when you're facing down against it in the sand. It can also buff its own attack stat with Swords Dance if you ignore it. It's also nice because even though it has 2 types, and Tyranitar also has 2 types, and between them they have the 3 types that are all immune to Sandstorm, there's no typing overlap between the two, which is nice because Tyranitar is far and away the best sand setter, so you're able to use 2 Pokemon and get 4 different types out of it. Even though they do overlap a lot in their weaknesses, you're still not overlapping on your typing. This is the main way that Excadrill has been used over the years as an offensive, fast sand rush attacker where it often holds the Focus Sash item, which requires 2 hits to knock it out. It can come in when the sand is up and finish off low HP Pokemon or threaten flinches with Iron Head or Rock Slide or just big ground type damage, but it's not the only way that Excadrill has been used. Let's say you want to run Excadrill, but you don't want to use sand on your team. Well, Excadrill has another very useful ability, Mold Breaker. This allows it to ignore the abilities of other Pokemon, which mostly takes the form of ignoring Levitate, so you can hit Pokemon like Rotom with your ground attacks, but also allows you to hit Pokemon like
I was about to say Mimikyu with its disguise. You just pop right through that disguise.
Mimikyu ignoring their disguise. This was one of the main sets that people ran on Excadrill during Sword and Shield, again when Dynamax was first released. And that's because Excadrill was one of the best Dynamax attackers in the game. You already know that Max Quake, the ground type max move, raises your team's special defense, but Max Steel Spike raises their physical defense. In other words, even though Excadrill is such an offensive Pokemon, it was able to boost both of its teammates' defense stats while also outputting huge damage. And even though Excadrill doesn't have phenomenal bulk, when you double its HP stat and start giving it multiple boosts in its defense stats, it becomes really difficult to get rid of. It also had incredible synergy with Togekiss, who was probably the best Pokemon when Sword and Shield first released. Togekiss was a very threatening support Pokemon who could flinch your Pokemon with Air Slash, redirect attacks with Follow Me, and even put Pokemon to sleep with Yawn. Because Togekiss was an actual flying type and not a Levitate Pokemon, it was also immune to ground type moves like Earthquake coming out of Excadrill. And it could also Dynamax itself if it wanted, using flying and fairy type max moves to do big damage and raise its team's speed. These two had incredible synergy, and they were on a lot of successful teams when the games first released. Now that Dynamax is gone though, Excadrill's back to being a sand rush attacker. It most recently won a regional, even though it wasn't thought to be a top threat, when paired with Pokemon like Tyranitar, Indeedee Male, and Sneasler. It's a Pokemon that I think
the Terra flying Tyranitar in the Sandstream T-Tar Excadrill duo is really cute and cheeky. Like that actually, like that really pleases me. I kind of love that actually.
Will always be good unless they invent a Pokemon that's basically Urshifu but Excadrill for me, which hopefully they never do. Coming in at number 5 is a newer addition to the games, Ursaluna. There are 2 different Ursaluna forms, but I'm lumping them together here at number 5 because they have the same Pokedex number, and I think it's weird to split a Pokemon like this up. Anyway, Ursaluna is one of the strongest Pokemon to come out of Scarlet and Violet, and it has some of the best results of any Generation 9 Pokemon, which is funny because it wasn't even legal for most of the first year. Let's talk about what the different Ursalunas do. Both forms share some things in common. They're both ground and normal type Pokemon who are relatively slow and hit really, really hard. Regular Ursaluna uses the Guts ability almost always when paired with the Flame Orb item to give itself a 50%.
See, because Flame Orb, right? So we talked about burn, like mitigating your attack stat by like 75%. Except that Guts negates that and also gives you that 50% boost. Like, Guts Flame Orb is really good.
Power boost and make it immune to all other status conditions. This is a big deal because Ursaluna as a normal type is able to use the move Facade, a move that starts out pretty weak but doubles in power if it's affected by a status condition. Combining the status condition, the boost from being a normal type, and the boost from Guts turns Facade into one of the single strongest attacks in the entire game.
Now that's a lot of damage!
It's even able to KO super tanky Pokemon like Amoonguss in a single hit. Ursaluna also makes use of its ground typing as it can use both Earthquake for spread damage and Headlong Rush. Headlong Rush is a newer move that is incredibly powerful, but lowers both the user's defense stats after it hits.
Is this like, yeah, this is Rayquaza. This is close combat, right? This is like how Rayquaza's Dragon Ascent is just close flying close combat, right? So this would be, well, I guess sorry, Dragon Ascent flying or is it Dragon? I thought it was flying. Oh my god, why do I not remember? This is embarrassing. Oh god, I literally was looking at Rayquaza the other day too. I'm pretty sure it's flying. It gets stabbed, that's all that really matters. Like, yeah, so this would be ground type close combat, right?
It's effectively ground type close combat, and given that Earthquake also hits your partner, it's a really good option because it not only does immense amounts of damage, but it also gives you access to a ground type move that doesn't miss and also doesn't attack your partner. Ursaluna Blood Moon plays a bit differently. While it's also a slow damage dealing bear, its stats focus instead on it being a special attacker, which again is hard to get as a ground type. It gets a signature move called Blood Moon, which is just Stupid. It's a stupid move. It's a normal type move that's pretty much as strong as Hyper Beam and never misses, and the only downside is that you can't click it 2 turns in a row. This really isn't that big of a downside because Ursaluna Blood Moon has other great moves like the always consistent Earth Power and Hyper Voice, which hits both your opponent's Pokemon. Normally, the way you'd get around a strong normal type attacker is to use Ghost type Pokemon, but Ursaluna Blood Moon has a signature ability called Mind's Eye, which not only allows it to ignore the target's evasion changes and any accuracy drops on its own end, but it also lets normal type moves hit Ghost type Pokemon. Both Ursalunas have had a ton.
So it's scrappy in between. There's been a direct increase in power level in regards to abilities in the past few generations. I mean, even like look at something like Araquanid's its Aqua Bubble, right? That kind of does a lot. Going into Calyrex Shadow Rider and Ice Rider, right? Like the riders, once it's actually fused together, it effectively has 2 abilities. The as one ability, giving it 2 abilities. This is another example of like it is a lot on paper of what it does. And it's really interesting to see this power creep in action coming from something like in Gen 3, like Levitate or Unnerved or Pressure or Intimidate, right? And to see Intimidate how longevity that's have. But it's also interesting to see abilities like this just get absolutely just kind of exploded.
Ton of success. And it's cool because we've seen them used both as Trick Room attackers and as Tailwind attackers and as hybrid attackers, actually being used in both Tailwind and Trick Room on the same team. They both output tons of damage and are really hard to deal with, and for players who are really good at positioning them, can basically just win the game on their own. Because they are so strong, they've also seen success both in the highest power level formats and the lowest ones. I think that as long as Ursaluna is put into Pokemon games in the future, it will continue having results.
Yeah.
And personally, I hope that I never have to deal with Dynamax Ursaluna Blood Moon. Okay.
That would be so funny.
Here's where things get really interesting on this list. There are 4 remaining Pokemon in the main portion of this list, and each of them has won the World Championships not once, but twice.
So that looks like... That looked like a Gastrodon, Groudon, Garchomp, and Landorus is what I'm thinking they are.
But twice. Every single Pokemon remaining has exactly 2 Worlds wins, and so ranking them was a little bit tricky, but in the end, I found an order that I really like. Let's start with number 4, Gastrodon. I guess Gastrodon technically also has 2 forms, just like Ursaluna, but because they have the same stats and are only cosmetic differences, I'm not going to talk about them separately. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fine. Like, they, I love the art where it just shows that Gastrodon just get into wars with each other. Like, they scream at each other. I keep joking that East versus West Gastrodon is just a gang war. You get the East Sea Gastrodon looking at the West Sea Gastrodon, and it just screams at it. I love Gastrodon. It's funny. Storm Drain is honestly super dumb. I actually really, sorry, double click.
To all the pink Gastrodon enjoyers. Anyway, in addition to being a 2-time world champion, Gastrodon is also a 3-time international champion. Gastrodon's interesting because while a lot of the ground type Pokemon on this list are offensive Pokemon that just aim to blow their opponents up with ground type damage, Gastrodon takes more of a supportive role. It's got really respectable natural bulk, allowing it to stick around, especially with a defensive item. But the main draw of Gastrodon and the reason why it's a 2-time world champion has to do with its ability. Storm Drain is a really powerful ability. It not only makes the user immune to all water type attacks, but it also draws them in, acting as a pseudo redirection for any single target water attack. This means that if
I heard you like using Scald, or I heard you like using the Rapid Fist attack from Urshifu, like he's saying, right? Grats. Would be a shame if that was going to try to go into my other Pokemon. Well, I'm redirecting it to me. Oh, by the way, my ability also gives me an immunity to it, and it also gives me a boost because you hit me with a water move. Storm Drain is so good.
If water tries to attack Gastrodon's partner, it'll be redirected into Gastrodon, do no damage, and give Gastrodon a special attack boost. For this reason, Gastrodon really shines when there are powerful water-type Pokemon who are dominating the format. But Gastrodon still has some use even when the opponent isn't using water-type attackers. Ground is such a solid offensive type that Gastrodon's able to put consistent damage out with Earth Power turn after turn, especially since it's so hard to get rid of it. It's not a Pokemon that you're often relying on for one-hit KOs, but it is a Pokemon where it can gradually chip your opponent down over time. It also learns the move Ice Beam, which has really good synergy with Ground since it hits the grass and flying type Pokemon that Ground isn't able to hit. Ignoring Gastrodon can also be dangerous for other reasons as well. During Dynamax, one of the best disruptive moves was Yawn, which causes a Pokemon to fall asleep unless they switch out. Switching out your Pokemon can range from being not a big deal at all to not even possible, but in Dynamax, you really didn't want to switch. You couldn't get rid of Dynamax with pretty much anything. Moves like Roar and Whirlwind didn't work, and there was really only one very cheesy strategy that you could use to force your opponent to give up their Dynamax. But if you hit a Dynamax Pokemon with Yawn, they'd be forced to either stay in and fall asleep the next turn, wasting their Dynamax turns, or switch out and finish their Dynamax turns and not be able to get full value out of it. Because Gastrodon was so tanky and it has 2 different immunities, it was one of the best Yawn Pokemon during the Dynamax era, and that's part of the reason it was able to win Worlds. It was also really good during the final year of Sword and Shield because Kyogre was a very popular Pokemon, and Dynamax Kyogre could only use single target water attacks. Basically, if you had Gastrodon on your team and your opponent Dynamaxed their Kyogre, they wouldn't be able to use their strongest moves. Ground and Water also have decent cover.
I mean, what is Max Kyogre going to do in that instance? What is it going to do? You probably have Max Shield because you're probably having something along the lines of, I don't know, maybe Calm Mind or something on it. It depends what you're running. I mean, I personally run a choice spec set, but it's, I mean, what do I have access to? I have access to Max Water, I have access to Max Electric, and I have access to Max Ice. I can't use Max Electric on the Gastrodon because it's immune to it. I can't fire off the Max Water because the Gastrodon redirects it, eats it up, and then gets stronger. What do? Max Ice, set Hailstorm. Grats. As soon as Max goes away and my choice item can resume, like, what do I hit? Water Spout? I'm already taking damage from the hail. Like, which actually would be interesting, considering how that would play out if we had the snow change that happened in Scarlet and Violet 1 generation sooner in Sword and Shield. I think that'd be a really interesting thing to analyze and actually kind of thought experiment that. Like, yeah, like that's a really relevant check to Kyogre.
Bridge, because water is only weak to grass and electric, and ground type Pokemon are immune to electric type attacks.
Yep.
Ground is also weak to ice and water, both of which water resists. This results in a type combination that only has 1 weakness to grass, though it is a quadruple weakness. Although Gastrodon doesn't have the best stats, its ability and its move pool and its typing and its coverage all combine to make it a very threatening Pokemon, and I'm not shocked at all that it won Worlds twice, and I think it's a Pokemon that can always pop up, especially when there are strong water type Pokemon around. Okay,
I actually didn't know that it actually had Whirlwinds under its belt. I will probably be looking at using Gastrodon in future games and future VGC formats when it's out. Like, Gastrodon's always kind of on the radar, especially when it's a water heavy format, like something like Walking Wake coming in, right, and trying to use like Hydro Steam. Like, yeah, just redirect it, right? Like, very interesting to think about. Very interesting to know that it's in the kit. It waxes and wanes in usage, but like Gastrodon is always one of those Pokemon that you're just like, I would have at least one around. Like, it just works. It can fit really well in teams. Like I said, you're not necessarily going for the one-hit knockouts, but you can definitely threshold things where if you say Earth Power something and it gets it down to, say, 75% HP, well, now something else is thresholded, especially with Swords Dance Boost, to be able to one-shot that, right? Like, it's a good support.
Before we talk about the top 3, let's talk about some honorable mentions. These will be quick. Number 1, Ting Lu. This is the Pokemon that I was the closest to putting on this list. It was really good during Regulation C of Scarlet and Violet. I think if it has good performances in future years, I could definitely put it on here, but it really was only good for one format so far within Scarlet and Violet, and after like the real Pokemon became legal, like Urshifu and Incineroar and like all these other really powerful Pokemon came back, Ting Lu just hasn't had any results. I think it definitely could make it on here in the future, but for now, not present. I wanted to mention Rhydon here. Actually, Rhydon's best performance at the World Championships is better than Rhyperior's. It made it all the way to the semifinals in 2013. This is because Rhydon actually has a decently high attack stat, and with the Eviolite item, it's very bulky. And that year...
Is it really 130? Good God. I thought it was like 90. I need to use it in my next Kanto run.
In particular, like I said, Thundurus was incredibly dominant and was paralyzing everything, and Rhydon could use the Lightning Rod ability, which is the electric type version of Storm Drain, to make its partner Pokemon immune to all electric type moves, and that was really valuable that year. Another honorable mention is Zygarde. Zygarde is a restricted Pokemon, which is definitely interesting. It's only legal during a couple rule sets every couple of years, and it's definitely not super dominant, especially because it's not that powerful, but it is really tanky, especially in its complete form. It's really hard to get rid of. It saw a bit of success. It was used with
Zygarde Complete is one of the hardest official Pokemon challenges I've ever had to try. Like, I was trying to shiny hunt Zygarde in my copy of Shield because I'm at the Max Raid Den. I have yet to find in the amount of times I've done it, I think I've beaten it twice. Like, it is a challenge. That's one of those I would have to get a group together, and our whole focus is to grind this thing. It is very easy to mess up a max raid Zygarde Complete. It is one of those that it is. Oh, if you haven't tried it, try it And then just, yeah, he's a big boy.
Like coil sometimes to set up its attack and defense stats, and sometimes you'd use it like Tapu Fini next to it, and you'd activate the Misty Seed to make it really bulky. It was annoying to get rid of. It was definitely strong, but I didn't think it deserved its place on this list. Nidoqueen I actually initially had over Nidoking on this list before I checked the results. It has a couple results. It's similar to Nidoking, except it's a little weaker, a little slower, and a bit bulkier. So just a different trade-off. It's basically just an alternate skin of Nidoking. And then lastly for the honorable mentions is Marowak. Marowak also was used in the top 8 of the 2013 World Championships. Similar to Rhydon, it's a Lightning Rod user that, again, makes its partners immune to Electro-type moves, which was very valuable back then. And it hits a bit harder than Rhydon because it can hold the Thick Club item, which doubles its attack stat. That being said, it hasn't really seen a lot of success outside of its Alolan form, and its Alolan form is a Fire type and Ghost type, so it's not relevant here. Okay, now all that we have left is the top 3 best ground type Pokemon. Number 3 will shock you, I have a feeling, because number 3 is Garchomp.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, no. Interesting. So that means Groudon and Landorus are above it. Lando is probably number 1 then. Garchomp at 3 is interesting, especially because of Garchomp's storied history. That's fascinating.
Now, Garchomp is an incredible Pokemon. I don't think anyone's surprised that Garchomp is on this list. The real question, though, is why is Garchomp not higher? And that's because the Pokemon above it are really, really good.
Yes.
Garchomp is also a 2-time world champion and a 6-time national and international champion. It's pretty clear that it is the strongest non-legendary ground-type Pokemon. I guess spoilers for what comes next. Garchomp is fast, strong, and relatively bulky, with good typing and multiple good abilities to choose from. Early on in VGC's history, it was often paired with Tyranitar because of how good Sandveil is. Sandveil giving all moves a chance to miss when the sand is up. Back in Black and White, sand never ended. It was just permanent weather unless your opponent overrode it somehow. And Garchomp has good enough natural bulk that it often took 2 or 3 different hits to get rid of it. And every time you attacked Garchomp, you had a chance to miss. Given that Garchomp is so strong and so fast and so good at putting out damage, missing 2 or oftentimes even 1 move against it could cause you to fall too far behind to recover. Nowadays, though, Garchomp tends to use the Rough Skin ability more often because it often works as a standalone Pokemon rather than one paired with Tyranitar. Rough Skin isn't as insane as Sandveil is, but it is more consistent because it always activates when the effect triggers rather than Sandveil, which only activates, 20% of the time. And also,
you know what? 20% of the time, it works every time, though. Like, and that's the other thing. The other thing contextually, especially if you played Smogon, I think Smogon had an evasion clause ban. Like, Sandveil Garchomp was banned. So thus, people defaulted to Rough Skin Garchomp to be able to use Garchomp because Smogon had banned Sandveil at that point in time. So that's something else you have to look at as well. Sometimes formats, playing with others, sometimes you'll have some sort of evasion clause or evasion ban. So that makes Sandveil unable to be used. I don't know. It's a trade-off. I think I do lean more in the Sandveil camp because that 1 in 5, that 20% sometimes just happens at the right point.
So it's really good at breaking focus sashes, and if you don't have sand on your team, then you don't really want Sandveil anyway. The main thing that makes Garchomp so strong is how fast it is and how strong it is. It definitely doesn't have the same stats as some of the, new power crept Pokemon, but it is really good and really consistent, and it's faster and stronger than a lot of Pokemon that tend to be used within a format. The real number you want to be above often is base 100. That's like where a lot of Pokemon tend to fall, and most formats prior to Scarlet and Violet, like back in the day. And with this speed stack, Garchomp was great at just outputting consistent damage. Dragon also has good synergy with ground offensively, because for a while, the only type that resisted dragon type moves was steel, and steel type Pokemon are weak to ground. Now we have fairy type Pokemon who are immune to dragon moves, but ground is at least still neutral against them, so it's not awful. Garchomp's main weakness is its quadruple weakness to ice, and the fact that it has stats that were really broken for a 4th gen Pokemon, not a 9th gen Pokemon. But overall, it's able to work around these weaknesses somewhat well. It is a Pokemon that has struggled a lot in recent years. Power creep has not been kind to Garchomp, and it has trouble keeping up with some of the most broken Pokemon that they're releasing nowadays. That being said, Garchomp just had a major resurgence because in the rule set following last year's World Championships, called Regulation H, all legendary Pokemon were banned, and all Paradox Pokemon to boot. With many of its main threats removed, Garchomp had an incredible string of performances, winning multiple regionals, getting second at multiple regionals, and being overall one of the staples of the format. It was able to take advantage of one of the newer tools added to the games, the Clear Amulet, which prevented its attack stat from being lowered, primarily via Intimidate.
You know what? That makes a lot of sense, though, because you're foregoing like the band, the scarf, you're foregoing items that usually would have to guarantee that the Intimidate is not going to lower your attack, especially when you start doing like Swords Dance and stuff, right? That actually makes a lot of sense. Huh. I mean, it's interesting to see that Garchomp still has a massive use case when some of the meta threats, whatever, like the rotation, quote unquote, is. So for example, maybe you don't have Tapus, maybe you don't have Paradox Pokemon, whatever can threaten it. When that's out of a format, Garchomp becomes not necessarily an auto pick, but a very, very enticing option.
I think that power creep has not been kind to Garchomp, and when all of the Pokemon are available, it's a Pokemon that probably can't keep up, which is part of the reason why it's not higher up on this list. The Pokemon above it absolutely can still keep up, but I do think that in formats where the power level is lower, we'll definitely be seeing more of Garchomp. Okay.
I think that the unfortunate and the sad part for me is that I actually really like Mega Garchomp, but it loses 10 speed. It goes down to 92, which makes it really hard to use and hard to keep up, because Garchomp's selling point is that it was at that 102, right? It was breaking that barrier. To go down, especially when the last time we had Mega Garchomp in a game, Tailwind was not dynamic. I wonder how Mega Garchomp would fare on Tailwind teams if in a modern Tailwind dynamic or dynamic Tailwind format. I think that'd be interesting to explore, and I might explore that should we get into some sort of VGC situation where we can test that out.
Okay, top 2, and they're both legendary Pokemon. My guess is that some of you probably expect that the number 2 Pokemon, Landorus, was going to be the number 1, but it's not.
Yeah, I was expecting that to be number 1. I'm actually really shocked. I want to hear the reasoning.
Just like Ursaluna, Landorus has 2 forms, and I'll talk about both of them here. Actually, also similar to Ursaluna, they both share typing, and one is a physical attacker, one is a special attacker. The most infamous one, of course, is Landorus Therian, who for a while was thought to be the best Pokemon of all time. Yeah. In addition to winning Worlds twice, Landorus Therian also got second at Worlds twice, and has won 6 national and international championships. Landorus Therian has a ridiculously high attack stat, in addition to good natural bulk and a respectable speed tier. It feels even bulkier than it actually is because it gets access to Intimidate, which again is one of the most versatile and generally useful abilities in the entire competitive game. It's also one of the best Intimidate users because of its stupidly deep move pool, which I really don't understand. Landorus gets great coverage moves like Superpower and Knockoff, but it also gets U-Turn, which causes it to not only do damage, but also switch out. U-Turn is...
It literally causes you to maintain that momentum, especially if you have something that is going to be weak against it. Landorus gets a dummy thick amount of moves.
An incredible staple of its move pool because it allows Landorus to switch out while also doing damage and scouting for what the opponent wants to do. And this allows it to get off the field while still doing damage, which then in turn allows it to reactivate Intimidate later on in the battle. U-Turn's also decent as a coverage move because although Bug isn't a very strong offensive type, one of the main Pokemon that countered Landorus for a while, or was supposed to counter Landorus, was Cresselia, who's a super tanky Pokemon that's immune to ground type moves and can learn ice type moves, which Landorus is weak to. That being said, Landorus could do good chip damage to Cresselia with U-Turn while also keeping itself safe thanks to its higher speed stat, making it much harder to pin the Tiger down. Ground and Flying also have really good offensive synergy together, since ground type Pokemon are unable to hit grass and bug type Pokemon for neutral damage, both of which are weak to Flying, and Flying's not very effective against Steel, Rock, and Electric type Pokemon, all of whom are weak to ground. Of course, this is less of a big deal because Landorus doesn't learn really any good Flying type attacks, but that's not so much of an issue because it's able to use Flying type moves with Z-Max and then Dynamax and now Terrestrialization.
Yeah, and that really becomes the big one is Landorus Therian was in fact a problem with the Dynamax mechanic because suddenly like you have a Landorus who is, yes, 4x weak, but if I remember my calculation correctly, there was nothing that actually one-shot it, even with the 4x ice. Like Max, as cool as the mechanic was in a lot of ways, had its problems. I think if you let specific Pokemon Gigantamax and not every Pokemon max, like, I think that would have been a little better. But like, yeah, like Z Flying, big hit. Dynamax, you have access to Max Airstream. Terra, I don't know. I'd have to look into his set specifically. I'm still not super familiar with it because I've mostly just like been snoozing this entire Scarlet Violet VGC. As I'm recently getting back into VGC, recently getting into the TCG again as well. My knowledge is just, I'm in catch-up phase, which is why I'm actually really liking Wolf's videos.
Landorus Incarnate was certainly never as dominant as Landorus Therian, but it was still very powerful, and it actually got second at the World Championships last year. It also has 2 national wins and a handful of regional wins. Landorus Incarnate, I think, is the best ground-type special attacker of all time. This is because, similar to Nidoking, it gets the ability Sheer Force. With Sheer Force, Life Orb, and its much higher special attack stat, Landorus Incarnate can output tons of ground-type damage that can't be slowed down by Intimidate. It was certainly never as dominant as Landorus Therian, but it was still a good Pokemon in its own right, and it actually had a ton of good performances last year alone. I actually think that last year it probably outperformed Landorus Therian on the whole. Landorus and Landorus are certainly 2 of the best ground-type Pokemon of all time. But the best ground type Pokemon of all time is Groudon. Groudon is a 2-time world champion, placed second at Worlds twice, and has 8 national and international wins. He's the Dawn. But what you have to understand about Groudon is that although it has pretty much as good or better results as any other Pokemon on this list, it's only legal for a fraction of the time. Yeah. Groudon is a restricted Pokemon, and restricted Pokemon are only legal during very specific rule sets.
So restricted Pokemon, for those who have come from early generations, are effectively legendary Pokemon. Your restricted Pokemon are going to be your Mewtwo, it's going to be your Lugia, your Ho-Oh, your Groudon Kyogre, Reshiram, Zekrom, etc., right? Or you can run certain things like Landorus, Therian, where you can run Zapdos, Moltres, etc. just fine. Your legendaries, as we used to know them, are your restricted Pokemon, and your mythicals Pokemon are your event Pokemon, right? Your Meloetta, your Mew, your Celebi, your Jirachi. Those are event Pokemon now. The terminology's kind of changed a little bit.
Playing competitively in 2011. The first year that Groudon was legal after I started playing was 2016. For contrast, Landorus was legal every single one of those years that Groudon wasn't. And Groudon still has better results. Now, Groudon also technically has 2 forms. It has its regular form and its primal form, which was similar to Mega Evolution, but more broken, if you can believe that. Primal Groudon was insane. It gained the fire typing, which caused it to only have 2 weaknesses to ground and a quadruple weakness to water, but its ability, Desolate Land.
About that ability, the ability made it not have a weakness. It gave it a pseudo immunity because as it says on screen, the Pokemon changes the weather to extremely harsh sunlight. You cannot override it unless you have something like a Delta Stream, Mega Rayquaza, or a Primordial Sea. You have a Primal Kyogre swapping in. So yeah, you effectively have, as long as Primal Groudon is on the field, Desolate Land is active, it can't be overridden by like Rain Dance, Drizzle, Sandstream. It can't be overridden by that. And water type attacks are just straight up nullified. Grats. What is weakness to water when you don't even need to worry about weakness to water so long as it's on the field, not overridden?
Turn the sunlight to Primordial Sunlight, which caused all water moves to evaporate and do 0 damage. So effectively, if the Primordial Sun was up, Primal Groudon only had 1 weakness. Primal Groudon has some of the best stats of any restricted Pokemon ever. It is ridiculously tanky, it hits super hard, and it even has the option of being a special attacker because it has a respectable special attack stat. It has a signature move called Precipice Blades, which is kind of Earthquake for gamblers.
Yeah, precipice miss, am I right?
It's higher risk, higher reward. It can miss, unlike Earthquake, but it's much stronger, and it doesn't hit your partner. Primal Groudon
That is 85. It has the same accuracy as Will-O-Wisp.
Also has ridiculous synergy with Xerneas, who at the time was the single most threatening restricted Pokemon. As a fairy type attacker, Xerneas' moves were only resisted by fire, poison, and steel type Pokemon, all of whom are weak to Groudon. Every single one of them. Steel's actually weak to both of Primal Groudon's types. Primal Groudon and Xerneas were the most threatening restricted duo in all of the years that they were legal, and they won the majority of tournaments, by far the most out of any restricted parent.
Dude, look at that. Look at the Groudon and Incineroars. Oh my god. I'm looking at 6th place and looking at Alex Berta, just like bringing Tapu Lele daring today, aren't we? Oh, that is a that's a core. That is a core of across the board. You have a core of Xerneas, Groudon, and Incineroar. Your flex picks are definitely going to be that Kartana. I'm sure this is Smeargle using Dark Void, right? Kartana and Venusaur are effectively your optional picks, and then you start seeing your fringe picks, such as potentially bringing a Ho-Oh, bringing something like a Crobat, bringing something like Tapu Lele, bringing something like Stakataka. Very interesting to see how dominant this core is.
But regular Groudon is no slouch. It won the World Championships in 2010 and got second at the World Championships in 2022 as well. Groudon was probably the second best restricted Pokemon behind Zacian during Sword and Shield, because it not only worked as a Dynamax attacker, becoming incredibly tanky, resetting its own weather if it went down with fire moves, and making its team more specially bulky with Max Quake, but it also enabled Gigantamax Charizard, who was probably the most threatening Dynamax attacker. Gigantamax Charizard was able to do unholy amounts of damage, often picking up one-hit KOs even on Dynamax Pokemon, but it was only able to do this if the strong Sunlight was up. The combination of regular Groudon and Gigantamax Charizard dominated for most of Sword and Shield during the year that it was legal, and it only just barely didn't win the World Championships. Now, it is worth noting that Groudon was legal during Scarlet and Violet's first restricted format, where you were only allowed to use one restricted Pokemon, and it didn't really have many good results. It was used as like a niche option here and there, and it certainly was threatening. Like, it was a Pokemon that players were aware of, but it was not in the top 7 best restricted Pokemon. I think this is in part due to power creep. I think this is in part due to the fact that it doesn't currently have
I think this is in part due to power creep, says
best
Wolf.
restricted Pokemon. I think this is in part due to power creep.
It immediately shows Fluttermane. No. What he says is not incorrect. This is not an incorrect statement. This is, in fact, a 100% true statement. As somebody who unironically does love Fluttermane, it's easily top 3 Pokemon for me. It is so dumb. This thing is... I'm not good at VGC. I'm aggressively okay. But to be fair, I also have a lot of knowledge and not a lot of practical play, right? Which is my downfall. Which is my shortcoming. When I can pick up Wiz with Fluttermane is dumb.
I think this is in part due to the fact that it doesn't currently have access to its primal form.
Yeah.
And I think it's because there's another restricted Pokemon that can set the sun up, which is much faster than Groudon.
Correct.
That being said, I would never count Groudon out, and I'm sure that it will certainly have a resurgence at some point in the future, especially if it ever gets its primal form back. And
100%.
those are the 10 best ground type Pokemon. I actually did another of these videos recently where I talked about the best ice type Pokemon. So if you enjoyed this one, you should check it out. Thanks for watching.
Which actually makes me really excited for Pokemon Champions to see if that is going to be the Stadium or like Battle Revolution quote-unquote thing for VGC to move to. That way they have more freedoms to design games whatever way they want. Very interesting to see if we're going to get Primals back. I'm sure we might. Then we might go through formats where it's not necessarily legal, but it'd be very cool. I thought this was great. Thank you, Wolf, for an amazing... Sorry, Wolfie. I'm brain. I cannot speak. WolfeyVGC, thank you for an amazing video. Thank your editing team for just such an amazing presentation. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun with this. Definitely go check out WolfeyVGC if you have not. Great source for a lot of Pokemon knowledge. And let me know what your VGC experience has been. Let me know if you agree with this list. Let me know how you'd move things. And thank you for watching.